Hello, everyone. My name is Susan Kimani, and I'm an events coordinator with Young ICCA. Together with Yomenik Notaj, one of Young ICCA's co-chairs, and Rahul Donde, our global events director, I am very pleased to welcome you to this installment of our webinar series. We are honored to have with us a very distinguished arbitration practitioner and professor, Professor Mohamed Abdel Wahab, founding partner and head of international arbitration, construction, oil and gas, and projects groups at Zulfikar and Partners in Cairo, Egypt. To state just a few of his accomplishments, Professor Abdel Wahab is also the chair of the Private International Law Department and professor of international arbitration at Cairo University, vice president of the ICCA International Court of Arbitration, member of the ICCA Governing Board, vice chair IBA Arab Regional Forum, vice chair Academic Forum for Investor State Dispute Settlement, dean and member of the Advisory Council for the Africa Arbitration Academy, and a member of numerous advisory boards and committees at different arbitration institutions, including the Cairo Regional Center for International Commercial Arbitration, or CARCICA, the Mauritius International Arbitration Center, or MIAC, and the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, among many others. Professor Abdel Wahab has served as sole arbitrator, presiding arbitrator, party-appointed arbitrator, legal expert, or counsel, and is listed in the rosters of many arbitral institutions. He has published on issues of international law, international investment and commercial arbitration. He is also the co-editor of a leading treatise entitled Online Dispute Resolution Theory and Practice in 2012, which received the CPR Award for the best published dispute resolution work in 2013. Professor Abdel Wahab has received many accolades, and to note a few, he received the 2018 ASA International Arbitration Advocacy Prize and was voted the leading Egyptian legal practitioner of 2017 by the Law magazine. In June 2019, he received the AYA Hall of Fame Award in London for the Africa Arbitrator of 2019, and in August 2019, he was honored by the Jordanian Minister of Justice, the Jordanian Arbitrators Association, and the Jordanian Construction Contractors Syndicate. In February 2020, he received the Lexology's Client Choice International Award. Professor Abdel Wahab, thank you for accepting our invitation and welcome to this webinar.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Now, before we begin, I will just say a few words about Young ICCA, which was established in 2020 with a mission to open the doors of international arbitration to young practitioners. We celebrated the organization's 10-year anniversary this year, and we think we're well on our way to fulfilling our mission. Our membership is free, and we now have over 8,500 members around the world benefiting from the programs that we offer in 4 key areas. And these are, first, we have workshops and webinars such as this one, focused on the development practical skills relevant to the practice of international arbitration for early career professionals and students. And second, we offer full tuition scholarships for graduate degrees in dispute resolution at universities in the United States, in Switzerland, and in China. And third, we have a blog platform on which we publish a curated selection of contributions from members on timely issues in international arbitration. And finally, we have a mentorship program through which we pair participants with senior practitioners for 2-year cycles in which they receive ongoing advice and career guidance. For those of you attending the workshop who are not Young ICCA members, I encourage you to visit the Young ICCA website and take up membership. You'll also find all the information about our latest activities there, such as well as our LinkedIn page, which is updated regularly. Also, please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any question or if you would like further information. With that being said, let us now move to the meat of this webinar, which will take the form of a Q&A session with Professor Abdel Wahab. We are very happy to have received from many of you a lot of questions, and we've done our best to compile them and categorize them by theme. If there are any questions that you'd like to ask, during the webinar, please feel free to type them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. Finally, please note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available on the Young ICCA's website. Without further ado, I'm going to lead us off with some questions about Professor Abdel Wahab's career in international arbitration. Theomenic will follow with some questions about diversity in international arbitration, and Rahul will take questions, will tackle questions of efficiency and due process in international arbitration. And time permitting, will also raise some miscellaneous but equally interesting questions. Now, starting off with building a career in international arbitration. Professor Wahab, you have served as an arbitrator, a legal expert, counsel in more than 200 arbitration cases. What was your first introduction to the practice of international arbitration, and how did you get from there to where you are now?
Thank you very much, Susan. I'm delighted, as I mentioned, to be here and to be amongst you, and amongst one of the greatest, what can I say, organizations that exist, ICCA and definitely Young ICCA. It is both refreshing, and I must say I'm here because I always am delighted to be amongst young members and to share experiences and thoughts. I can't say we have always been having the pleasure of being assisted by some elder colleagues all the time. Of course, there's some assistance, but I think now the world has opened its doors, and to be here amongst you is really a great relief and a standout moment for me. Briefly so, and I think this may not be known to many. My first introduction was back in 1998 when I graduated and I joined a law firm in my country. And I was a fresh graduate at the time. I graduated top of my class, which was about 4,000 students at the Faculty of Law, Cairo University. And I think I was knocking on the doors of the people to get more and more work, the partners in the firm. And I think one of them apparently got fed up and said, okay, you want a case? Here is a case. And that was a case that has been ongoing for about 10 years. It originated as an arbitration and then went into courts, all sorts of courts, public, administrative, traditional, and then went to the Constitutional Court. And there was no solution because it was a huge case. And at the time, there was an issue with the Arbitration Act regarding the challenge of arbitrators. At the time, it was when you challenge one arbitrator, that's fine. Who decides the challenge? The two other members. And so one of the parties challenged the two other members. So the whole tribunal is challenged. And so there was a problem. Who's going to decide? Is it the court or the arbitral tribunal? And there was a big fuss about it. And it went all through to the courts and stuff. So, and when I came in, I looked at the case, huge files. And I just wondered, there was one provision in the Code of Civil Procedure that was, it sits there, it's not normally utilized and applied. And I came and I told them, okay, I mean, I may be naive, but did you think about that provision? It applies. And then he looked at me, told me, this is not law school, this is practice. I told him, yeah, but this is a provision in the law. Why can't we give it a shot and apply it? And he looked at it, and then suddenly we had a meeting with other partners, the whole litigation and arbitration teams within the firm. And I presented my idea and argument to them, and they decided to adopt it as a defense. And it worked, even though it has not been invoked and sitting in books and in the codes for years and years, and people do not necessarily know about it. And I think since then, people realized maybe this guy has something, and I started getting cases. And I never said no. I was working day and night. This is not a suggestion that you should be doing so, by the way, but this is just how I did it, working through getting cases. And I remember some of the cases being dumped on my desk in the post-hearing briefs where they felt it's lost. And to turn around the case at this stage, I found that this is a passion for me, that the ability to make a difference, if at all possible. And that's how I managed to get through.
Wow, well, that's fascinating. Now, just coming off of that, Who's Who Legal Arbitration in 2020 says, I'm going to read, Mohamed Abdel Wahab is at the top of the market and a very well-prepared and exceptional arbitrator. Who would you characterize as a well-prepared arbitrator, and how do you ensure that you're well-prepared for your cases as counsel and arbitrator?
I'm very grateful for this code, by the way. And when I saw it, I said, okay, what do they mean by market? Do they mean the Egyptian, the regional, international? and talking to some people said, no, it was when the global, the arbitration market, so that was a very kind thing. But let me say, what I think is important for an arbitrator, and I think it has helped me sitting both as counsel and arbitrator with the following. When you do counsel work, there are certain expectations that you have from the arbitrators. So when you wear the arbitrator's hat, you remember that. And amongst the most important things is being well prepared on top of things. And I'm saying that for the first time, you have to stay ahead, otherwise you fall behind. And staying ahead means you get a submission, you think about, of course, you review it and you think about what the future submission could be. You prepare the points on the side that may come along the way, because people tend to forget, especially when you have a number of cases ongoing. You prepare yourself for the hearing. You take seriously the parties' arguments and counsel. You look at the evidence on record and you prepare yourself. And I think this preparation is extremely important at the early stage. And when you are presiding a tribunal, starting with the drafting of the award early on is key, because otherwise the case can spin off hands and it becomes a problem. I also think that mastering issues of fact and law is critical. The ability to listen, have an open mind, and I'm not saying just as a slogan, it is not easy for any person to free themselves from the shackles of their legal, cultural background restraints and see things in the legal system or under the applicable law which they're entrusted to decide. So I think the most important thing is that you give due attention to that, and not to fall into a traditional common trap for arbitrators when they sit in many cases, is that, oh, I've seen this before and I know what they're going to say, that's not going to fly. Think about it, because there could be one argument, one point, one piece of evidence that may define a case and make a difference. So it is important that you give due attention to details as well, and pay a lot of attention to how you draft, not just the awards, the procedural orders, the points that you make, because again, counsel are very witty and intelligent, and they will jump on a statement that you make one way or the other. So you have to be careful with the words that you put in an order or a decision or in an award.
Right. So being nuanced at every stage. Okay. Very, very important. Right. I'm not sure how the arbitration market was in 1998 when you started in Egypt. But some of our participants are wondering, how does one excel in international arbitration when opportunities in their native countries are limited?
That's an excellent point. And let me say the following. First, you have to set yourself apart. We all start, at least in our part of the world, with domestic cases and domestic work. And that can come in handy because there could be a foreign element or involvement of some sort. I just have an important piece of advice there. And these are words that I mentioned when I was honored to get the Swiss Arbitration Association, the ASA prize. And they came out naturally. I didn't prepare them. I said, I'm delighted to receive this, one of the highlights of my career. It's a global advocacy prize. And I said, it confirms the point that it matters not where you practice, but what you do that counts. And I think we have to recall that, because at least on Africa, on the continent, or in the Middle East, we have a traditional perception that when you sit there and you practice there, you may not necessarily have a bright future. You would have a better opportunity if you go abroad and practice there, which does help immensely. But it was a conscious choice that I made to return, practice in my home country, build a team and build a practice there. Now, I can't say that in Egypt, the opportunities are limited. Egypt has a well-established arbitration culture for decades. And of course, a legal culture that has a wide influence across the MENA region. But I fully understand where the question is coming from, especially in some jurisdictions in Africa. But my point is that, why don't you use this as an opportunity, a launch pad? There aren't many practitioners known in many African jurisdictions. And I'm talking about some small-sized countries, not in terms of weight, but in terms of the legal culture there. If you set yourself apart and distinguish yourself, of course, arm yourself by getting possibly further studies abroad, get a training opportunity abroad. But when you return and practice in your country, first of all, you could be the master of that jurisdiction. People will turn to you whenever a case arises. You will get to be known in the legal circles as the go-to person in that jurisdiction. The challenge, of course, is that how you free yourself, again, from the territorial boundaries of this and be perceived as possibly a regional actor and then eventually as an international actor. It's not impossible, it is possible, but do not think that your opportunity or chances are nil if you practice in your home country. Of course not. You do have a good shot, and there is evidence. There are many leading world-renowned African practitioners who have practiced in their country alone and managed to break through. It is, of course, difficult, but doable.
Right. And one of the inevitable occurrences for a young practitioner, especially in a smaller jurisdiction, in a smaller law firm, is that you have to participate in both international arbitration and litigation, especially at the start of your career. And one of our participants, actually a few, are wondering, how do you successfully navigate the demands of litigation and international arbitration practice?
We all pass through that phase. Now, you've got to decide, first of all, know your skills and abilities and how much you can take, how much you're able to deal with at a certain point in time. I've done before becoming exclusively now engaged with arbitration across different specters, being construction, oil and gas, telecommunications, finance, but it is arbitration, what I do every day, 24/7. And I think at a certain point in your career, when it's international arbitration at a large scale you're doing, I have to tell you this candidly, it's a monogamous relationship. Arbitration does not allow you and does not like to be shared with others if you're doing it at that scale. But to reach that is one point. Initially, all what you take on board, knowledge of corporate litigation, whatever, does help enrich and sharpen your senses and talents. And by doing so, it serves down the road understanding of the legal system, issues of procedure, substance, until you get the opportunity where the work you do in arbitration is overwhelmingly the work that you do all days. I think navigating this with litigation is a bit challenging. If you're very successful in litigation as a litigator, but you have a passion for arbitration, you've got to decide whether really you can land an opportunity in arbitration and work on it, or seize the opportunity and become a leading litigator in your own jurisdiction. Now, you've got to understand as well, is the most important thing is that you candidly look in the mirror and say, can I do both for at least for some time? If you manage this, it's fine. But if you find that the quality of your work or the time allocation or management between both, you have to make a choice.
And that is a perfect segue to the question of skills, which skills to build. What would you say are the hard skills and soft skills that aspiring professionals in this field focus on building? And for you personally, what worked for you? What was the most beneficial?
Of course. Let me start general and then I'll tell you personally, because maybe my personal experience would not apply to all. Now, generally, we talk about soft and hard skills. I think the soft skills are the easiest to build, to tell you the truth. You've got to be nice, communicative, confident, have the ability to speak in public, communicate with people. These are things, of course, you can learn. Some people have issues with confidence, shyness. This is all understandable. But if you're going to break through into the legal field, you have to convince yourself that you have what it takes and work on this, and your communication skills, networking, all this is fine. But I think amongst the most important, if not the most important, and that is what really I thought was important and I focused my career on, are the hard skills. The law. You master the law, you open the doors. And I mean by that the following. You can spend all the time you need having lunches, dinners, receptions, networking, but if you don't have the substance, this will carry you forward for some time, but it's not going to work all through. And with what we see, with a lot of networking, lots of opportunities, the world opening its doors to everyone, many people are networking, of course, but you need to do the work. And doing the work takes you forward at a much faster pace, sustainable pace than anything else. Now, when it comes to me, I have focused most of my life, really professional life, on building those hard skills. Not just at the university, but even when I graduated, I was working round the clock. I was not doing any events. I was not visible. It was my work that made me visible. That at least what happened to me. And then when I decided, okay, it's easy to network and stuff, then you have something meaningful to say, hopefully, you have substance to share, and people then start to see that you add value. You could be a very nice person, a very pleasant person, and you should be, by the way, without any sort of vanity or stuff. But at the same time, people know. I was sitting one day with a very prominent Swiss arbitration practitioner, and we were having lunch. I was communicating with that person, and I'm very careful not even to define the gender of the person. And then I told, you know what, it's a big problem. You see people just networking all the time. Who's doing the work? You're doing the work, and it may not be visible as others. They are around everywhere, but we're working. And are we noticeable? And that person said, you are noticeable to the extent that we're having lunch now. That's one thing. Secondly, we know very well when we want to have some nice time, a nice chat with person, but when it comes to hard core work, we know where to go. And I think this was a defining moment. You can have excellent relationships with many, but when it comes to making a choice about counsel, arbitrator, expert, about doing the work, you have a handful of people in jurisdictions to think of. And being one of those is my advice to you. Make sure that you're one of those, because then this will be the defining moment. This sets you apart. The hardcore substantive skills, your weight in law, that carries you forward.
Excellent. Professor, we're now heading into a section that I find quite exciting, and it is your standout career moments. And one question that we have for you is, if you could go back in time to the beginning of your career in arbitration, what would you have done differently?
My straightforward answer is nothing. I wouldn't have done anything differently, and I'll tell you why. What many people tell me, I think I'm normal like any other person. In fact, there are many people who are better as anyway. But I think we should be forward thinking and forward looking. We learn from past experiences, but I prefer not to look and regret things, because it takes a lot out of the positive energy. It doesn't carry you forward. What carries you forward is to learn from past experiences, not to regret these moments. I wouldn't have done anything differently. Let me tell you a story as well. When I finished my PhD in England, which again, I value this time a lot. It was time that I, helped build my mind and career in a way. My supervisor, God bless her soul, and during my examination and after that, the examiners, they said, you stay on board. I was offered a lectureship at the university. Stay here, don't go back. Offered opportunities to work in law firms. There, even at a certain point in Australia, to go and practice, and Paris, London. And I said, I'm going back. And I will be candid about this, and I don't know whether this is something people will appreciate or not, but this is, I swear to God, this was the case. I went back because of my parents. We are three sort of siblings, and my sister was with her husband traveling. My elder brother is abroad living. And I said, people don't give birth so that their children leave them. So I went back, and I stayed there. And my supervisor said, you know what? You would make an excellent material. If you stay here, you will be world renowned. You go back, you be no one. You'll be just amongst the many there. I said, you know, I'll take my chances, but I value this. And in as much as I like the academic and professional environment and the visibility being in Europe and in England, of course, is tempting. I gave priority to that, despite the fact that my parents told me to stay on and not come back. But I came back. A couple of years later, my father passed away, but at least I got to spend those couple of years with him. And I think what I achieved today, it was because of that decision. I can't say if I stayed on, I would have been possibly as visible. I would have landed the opportunity to work on what I have done. Remember one thing, at the type of work and the level of work we get exposed to, at least in my country, you do a lot of things that people in certain leading jurisdictions, when they are at junior level, they will not be able to do. It's more senior people. So this has expedited the track of exposure and the level of work in drafting, in doing a lot of things. And I even tell my dear colleagues and members of the team that they get opportunities with this that may not necessarily be easily available elsewhere. So this has helped a lot, and it helps you make a difference. Easier visibility. Of course, there is competitiveness, and today you're competing with the world, not just with one jurisdiction. And that's why I don't think I regret anything. In fact, everyone told me at the time it's a wrong decision, but I took the decision for the right reason, I thought, and it turned out better than I expected, at least from my own point of view.
Right, right. I mean, I think we can all agree with that. And looking back at your career, what was your greatest professional challenge in developing a practice in international arbitration, and how did you overcome it?
Okay, now I think the challenge, let me tell you the highlights and the challenges. Now, I think the challenge is the following. You know, when you have an actor who performs a role as a comedian, they always confine him to that role. So you're good with that, so you stay there. And it's difficult to free yourself from this. And I think for many of us, either in Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, Asia, in many respects, the difficulty is that to be seen as a world-class practitioner beyond the territorial boundaries of your jurisdiction. So I always say this, you can easily become a leading figure in your jurisdiction, at least in our part of the world, the go-to person, but to be constantly defined as Egyptian law authority, the challenge is you break from this to become a regional authority, and then it's a totally different level and game to be seen at the level of a world class. And I think this was the greatest challenge, is to say, well, look, I mean, you look at our esteemed colleagues and leading authorities from the UK, France, Switzerland, they are perceived as world leading practitioners. They can sit in cases and prosecute arbitrations involving many jurisdictions. So why is it not possible for people in different parts of the world to do the same? Do you have to practice there to be seen as one? Not necessarily. You just have to arm yourself with what it takes and work much harder, sometimes 10 times, to be able to be seen as being capable of doing this. So this was the greatest challenge, is to break free from the shackles of territorial boundaries, regional boundaries, and get the confidence and trust that you are an international player. So that is the greatest challenge. Now, in terms of the career highlight moments and cases have contributed to that, there are, briefly so, 4 cases. One of them is one of my very early cases that I took once I as counsel about English law. It's purely an English law case, and it was my first oral pleading in an international case against an English barrister. Now, of course, you step in the room, you're very young, and I was doing it. There was no partner to do it because it was English law. And imagine, and we didn't have an English law firm with us, but it's international arbitration. And you left a great impression, to the extent that towards the end of the day, that learned colleague came and said, I don't want to be surprised by you tomorrow like I did today, and I want to know what is your skeleton for tomorrow. This is mine, and let's exchange that. You know, you can't imagine how difficult it is when you step into the hearing and you think, are you a match to a barrister at the time when you're very young or not? Now, again, the hard skills are important, but I said, okay, what does it take? I mean, you either perform well or you lose the opportunity. So that was a defining moment, and I think it worked well. The other one is that we stepped to represent an entity, a state-owned entity in that arbitration, the other one, at the stage of post-hearing briefs. They were not represented in the arbitration at all. On the opposing side, you had an international firm, sole arbitrator, who got fed up by our client who was not participating. And we step in, we said, we represent them, just give us a month. He said, you know what, you've been delaying the arbitration. I told him, we're not, we've just been appointed. And we'll prove to you that this case is a sham, more or less, and there's no basis for the claim. So he said, I'll give you, and I remember very well, I'll give you a month, but if there's no compliance, I will pass a draconian measure against you in a way. That was a sole arbitrator. We filed one brief that I personally drafted with one colleague. It was a very serious case, and we won the case based on one submission. That is a career highlight, and that is, I think, one of the cases that I'm very proud to win, because it's very difficult after a case has been ongoing for a year and a half, and you step in and you file a submission that makes a difference. The other one is a huge case when we're hit by a counterclaim. We filed hit by a counterclaim in billions, and we go into more than a 2-week hearing, and again you get an award dismissing all the counterclaims. Another career highlight is a gas pricing dispute that we are representing a client, and the opposite party, this time we're representing a client, the opposite party was a state entity, and they told the client, we will only agree to arbitration on the following conditions: you do not bring a counterclaim, you just defend the case. So I told the client, why did you agree to that? He said, you know, that's the only way to get to arbitration. And you enter into this a difficult gas pricing dispute, and you win for the client. These are, to me, career highlights, difficult cases, pressuring, and I think they have made an impact.
Wow, Professor, it's been fascinating speaking with you. I will now hand over to my colleague Theominic to speak about diversity in international arbitration.
Thanks, Susan. Hello, Professor, again. I really enjoyed the conversation we've had with you so far, and I wanted to bring this topic up. ICCA recently released its cross-institutional task force report on gender diversity in arbitral appointments and proceedings. And Young ICCA would have collaborated with that task force just as recently as Tuesday to host a webinar. So we know that now there are a lot of discussions going on at the moment about diversity in arbitral appointments. We wondered which tips or what kind of advice would you have to young and aspiring professionals who want to receive their first appointment and become successful arbitrators?
Of course. Let me say one thing, first of all. The arbitration field is not reduced to the arbitrator rule. So you've got to maximize your opportunities. Doing counsel work helps a lot. To land, let me say the following: institutions, and I can say I have the benefit of being exposed to a number of institutions. Institutions are doing excellent work. And this, as you mentioned, the cross-institution task force and many initiatives, the pledge and arbitral women, a lot of initiatives. And I realize the problem, and those who know me personally know that I believe that women have very, very superior senses and qualities that they can bring to the arbitration process to steer the tribunal in the right direction. I think opportunities are immense. And I think ICCA, for one, has opened its doors years ago to arbitration practitioners, and the young ICCA is doing a formidable job with that. There are too many initiatives, and a lot is going on. But of course, the question is supply and demand. Ultimately, when you talk about arbitral appointments, institutions have done and are doing their job in giving opportunities to new blood being infused into the system and injecting this new blood and bringing in new faces on board. That is true, and that is a reality. What is done, is it enough? Not necessarily. A lot remains to be done. But parties have to live up to the expectations, and counsel as well, in terms of making appointments. I try my best when we're doing as counsel cases to bring in new faces. And by the way, what I mean by new faces, not just younger colleagues. There are elder colleagues who are entering the arbitration fields. I must say, factionless do not fall into the under 40 bracket, so they also deserve an opportunity. So that is the case, as well as the younger colleagues as well. But to be able to do this, you need to arm yourself with the needed skills. We talked about soft and hard skills, but I think working on your toolbox and your hard skills will help a lot, because when you land an opportunity, you have no option but to perform exceptionally well. Because if you land this first opportunity and you don't do well, it is very difficult, because people put their reputation at stake by giving you an opportunity. Institutions do the same by giving you an opportunity, and you have to make the most out of it. Now, as I mentioned, in terms of gender, a lot is being done. And again, this brings a lot of opportunities to younger colleagues. And this cross-institutional task force highlights that. I mean, look at, for example, the ICCA court now has a parity in terms of gender. Appointments are on the rise. Recently, the LCIA has done a formidable job, approaching almost 50% of the appointments, males and females. There are a lot of tribunals where we have females on board, and even we have all female tribunals. So this is one aspect of diversity that is given due attention, and a lot of work is done. But I think along the side, there are other aspects of diversity that deserve a lot of attention: ethnic and cultural diversity. And when we look at culture specifically, having dedicated part of my PhD to culture and part of the cultural studies, is that culture brings a lot to the table. So if we talk about diversity, whether gender or culture, the impact on arbitration is colossal. First of all, it solidifies the legitimacy of the process. It defies the long-standing perception that it is a closed club. It as well, and I think that is one of the things that is unconsciously overlooked. When you sit with people on tribunals or do work as counsel with different people, counsel teams of different cultural backgrounds, it helps a lot with two important things: tolerance and coexistence. You realize that there is more in common than what meets the eye initially. We tend to think of ourselves as different from others, and that is true in a sense. But when you look beyond that, you will see that there is a lot in common between human beings from different cultures, maybe different ways of thinking, but it allows you to appreciate different approaches, different cultures, bring the best out of you to the table, dispense with misconceptions about alienation and foreigners. And this has a lot of impact on communication skills and the ability to communicate with people and get the best decision-making process available.
Thank you for that. I actually wanted to segue into asking you, what is the effect of cultural diversity in international arbitration, but you sort of already answered that. So my next question is, how can one break into the international arbitration circle in the Western world coming from a developing country? I know that you've already hinted at what you think should be done in earlier responses, but maybe a more streamlined response can happen now for those who may have missed it or joined on later.
Of course. Now, breaking, as I mentioned, into this, I think, to tell you the truth, again, it's the hard skills that count. Work, work, work. Arbitration is a field that requires hard work. Those who do arbitration know it is. It is high adrenaline, high contentious type of work. When you do arbitration, it's like a surgery. You are a surgeon in a way, in an operations room. And you got to do it properly and in the right way. So to do that, people have to see that you have what it takes to do it. I know it's hard work and it's demanding, but it's also self-fulfilling. It's gratifying. these are the moments where you prosecute a case, plead a case, examine, cross-examine witnesses, score points with tribunals, be it of substance or procedure. It is very fulfilling. To do that, I think, is first of all, you need to master your understanding of the procedure of international arbitration, master the understanding of the law, perhaps if more than one law, that is perfect. And I think making it from our part of the world, if you want to make it internationally, you should position yourself as someone with an experience of comparative law, interdisciplinary type of expert. And that is the way. I think if you just stay at home and just do nothing, apart from the day hours of the work, I don't think you will make it internationally. You've got to do more than this. Have the passion, love what you work on, and arbitration really requires someone who likes and love it, because it's demanding. And making a segue, as you mentioned, to the Western world means that you have to be seen as an authority on your, at least, jurisdiction, in your jurisdiction and on your law. And there will be international cases where you'll be invited to co-counsel initially on this, and they have to see that your role is really a co-counsel, not just back office. And to do that, you have to bring something of substantive value to the table.
Thanks, Professor. That's actually a very good point and would segue into our next theme of questions. It's going to be addressed by Raul on efficiency and due process in international arbitration.
Thank you very much, Professor, for all of your responses so far. It's an extremely interesting session, and we very much appreciate, as I'm sure all our participants do, the candor with which you're answering. I'm going to steer the conversation to a different direction, and I think it's a direction that all of us are equally affected by, and that is the effect of COVID-19 on international arbitration. The effect of COVID-19 on arbitral procedure. What changes has the coronavirus introduced into international arbitration? What changes are more permanent? And what would you recommend younger practitioners do in order to align themselves to this changing dynamic?
Great. Thank you very much, Rahul. That's a question that involves, if I chop it down into pieces, a lot to say. Let me say in one word, I see the impact of COVID-19 on arbitration as transformative. And I'm very careful to choose that word. Some people discuss this as revolutionary, which is a valid point. Others think it's a catalyst for change. That's another valid angle of it. But one thing for sure, it is transformative. In terms of procedure, it has put us to test to reconsider the traditional perceptions on procedural aspects of international arbitration. And I think we all agree there is an overwhelming wealth of resources now, and webinars and initiatives by a lot and everyone, and all great, about how the arbitration proceedings are changed, and going virtually or remotely in a way is one aspect of it. And by the way, and this is not just a thing, but I have to congratulate my colleagues, Professor Dr. Maxi Scherer and Nusha Basiri, on the great work. I'm co-editor with them on it, the International Arbitration and the COVID-19 Revolution, that is available online and will be soon in hard copy as well. I think it is important to say that the practice is changing. It is. And this, by the way, is another important aspect that we need to consider when it comes to diversity, because the younger generation as well now, with their great skills in technology and otherwise, will have headway into this. And in terms of how this is transforming, I can't say on the law specifically, but apart from the fact that we talk about force majeure, exceptional circumstances, issues of interim and emergency laws being in place, but this is something that jurisdictions are considering and modernizing their legislative infrastructure. That is true. one aspect, of course, in ISDS is bilateral investment treaties are being revised and revisited in light of the COVID-19 element, in addition to the ongoing discourse of the ISDS globally. But on the procedure, now looking at remote hearings as an option, looking and revising procedural orders, which procedure order number 1 was to many set in stone with minor differences. Now the language is changing. You're going as well for more electronic arbitrations, which is greener to the environment. And we know Lucy's Greenwood initiative about greener arbitrations, which is commendable, of course. And I think it is very important that this interplay of procedural issues and changes that are undergoing because of COVID-19 will undoubtedly have their impact on arbitration. And one specific aspect is when it comes to cross-examination and hearings, for example. We now see more efficiency, more streamlined, more better use of time in hearings, in virtual hearings, compared to traditional physical hearings taking place. So all this is transforming the practice of arbitration and giving room for new blood being infused into the system, new perceptions, new ideas, which sets the stage and paves the way for those with an interest and having good ideas to come on board and showcase their skills.
Right. Thank you very much for that. I think that's very interesting, and I fully agree that I think arbitral procedure is likely to change on a more permanent basis. But keeping that in mind, if you were a recent graduate, whether just out of law school or just looking at getting into international arbitration, what do you think are the soft and hard skills that practitioners or younger practitioners especially should develop, should evolve, keeping this new dynamic in mind? You've spoken about a few soft and hard skills already, but I'm wondering whether there's something specific that you would, keep in mind, just given the fact that, the arbitral procedure is likely to change in the future.
Absolutely. Let me say the following. Many people are frustrated. I can understand the frustration of the recent grads who graduated and suddenly, instead of having their internships and having their opportunities, it is not easy. But this is one side of it. Now, if you look beyond this serious challenge, there is a myriad of opportunities out there. Why? For the following. Previously, if you were, for example, from an African jurisdiction and want to do an internship abroad, or vice versa, you would need to get a visa, travel, and it's a hassle for everyone. Sometimes it's difficult to do that. Now, going online allows people to have virtual internships. You don't need to get a visa for any place. You can work remotely. Firms have been pushed out of their comfort zone of having people coming to work every day physically. And now, as long as the work is done properly, and this is underlined by 1,000 lines, and I speak from experience, is that the work is done properly, people have become more flexible about this. And some firms have said, 2020 is a work from home. Others have said, no. I mean, at least in my home jurisdiction, people are being forced to go to offices. But I, for one, and this is a reality, and you can ask my arbitration team, I told them, as long as the work we're doing it and efficiently and done properly, we can work from home to the extent that we're catering properly for the client's needs and everything. And so far it has been going fine, and people are working and doing their jobs properly. Now, of course, if you need to go to the office to do something, that's possible. But I think the opportunity, the message there is that you can work virtually as long as you're doing the work, as I mentioned, properly and timely. And this opens the door. You jump over the traditional fences of territorial boundaries and visas and issues, and you can work. And in an international firm, and there are many magic circle firms and leading practices worldwide, it is now possible for them to get people on board for internships and trainings, virtually or otherwise, compared to before. It also, and I think that is an element of diversity that is overlooked, people with certain special needs or disabilities. If you have a mobility disability, working from home now is not just a percentage that you need to have on your books. You can have brilliant minds and very capable people who have this mobility problem working virtually or remotely and delivering the work as efficiently as someone not having the same issue. So I think these are opportunities that need to be explored. I don't think a lot of attention has been given to that, but certainly there is a lot to be learned from this, and a lot of opportunities arise because of that.
Thank you. That's actually very interesting. And coming from India, I can only but subscribe to your views about how important COVID-19 is in making the passport less important and the lesser need for visas and work permits. I have just one last question for you, but let me just quickly take this opportunity to remind all of our participants that Professor Wahab has kindly agreed to take live questions as well. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask, following up on any of his responses during the webinar already, feel free to ask those in the question and answer box, and we'll take those up, subject to time permitting. Several questions that we've asked you now already, Professor, were, we've taken in questions from the participants already, but sometimes there are follow-ups that people like to ask on hearing your responses. So I suppose my last question to you really is following up on an issue that you touched on, and also keeping in mind the general progress and the developments in this area in investment arbitration in Africa. I think there is personally a lot of interest amongst younger practitioners in investment arbitration in Africa, and there's somewhat of a hurdle. It seems like a very a field that's almost reserved for the elite, so to speak, and it's hard to break into it. Is there something that you would recommend that younger practitioners should do, especially from the African region, keeping in mind the opportunities available, in order to kind of build themselves or build their career in investment arbitration?
Of course, a number of things. First of all, you need to study the field carefully, know the precedents, know the authorities, have a very good understanding and appreciation of public international law, private international law, the specificities of a jurisdiction, read awards in ISDS, understand intricate issues. So there is a lot to be learned there. And then start to consider making good publications about this. And I always say that people, when they become well known in their career, they shy away from writing a lot or expressing views to avoid possible challenges that you have expressed a view. And I think in ICCA Miami 2014, I made a point by, there was a meeting, and I said, look, I would advocate for academic immunity of arbitrators. And what did I mean by that? Is the following, and I think it could generate a lot of controversy. My point is the following. You see arbitrators challenged in that field on the basis of views expressed, either in writings they make, so that's why people do not write, or views expressed in conferences, stuff like that. And my point is, I don't think that they should be challenged on that for one reason. First of all, if they don't express the views on these matters, you will not know about them, but they will always be there. But it's better that you know the views, try to change them because they are abstract as a matter of law. But if you know that, you'll be able to approach your case as counsel in a certain way or present authorities to the extent that people do not have inappropriate predispositions. And that makes things more transparent and more visible, and enriches the field as well by allowing them to publish on the basis of their expertise and experience. So the younger generation, they need to take more proactive law by making publications on good points. Now, that comes with a caveat and a caution. Arbitration is a field that when you publish in, not only requires knowledge, training, and understanding of abstract legal concepts. You have to be practicing to understand as well how it works. And I think it helps when you land that opportunity to work as counsel to use that as well, and perhaps assist with the research of the partner you're working with, or have a joint article, or think about a publication of some sort, a commentary of some sort, and that helps. But to break into that field, I think what really matters is not just the writings or the speeches, is doing the work. So you need to work on cases, see how it's done, and in sometimes working as tribunal secretaries, it does help a lot if you don't land an opportunity as an arbitrator. And that, I think, makes a difference and allow you to break into that inner circle of ISDS. But I think as well, ISDS itself is undergoing a transformation globally with this. And I think Africa specifically, and the African Academy is doing a formidable job there. I'm not saying this just as a dean, but I'm saying that because of the 7 Magnificent, who are bright, younger African colleagues carrying these initiatives forward. The point is, participating in the work of institutions about these initiatives or projects does give you an insight, an excellent understanding of how things work. And that also helps breaking into the field. And Africa now is a spot on within the radar of everyone, and everyone has an interest in it. So that's why I'm saying Africans need to up their game to be able to compete. And they are, by the way, there are many, many talented practitioners in Africa, Latin America, Asia, of course, Europe, that really deserve an excellent opportunity. There are talents out there. And which I think I called for something called arbitral scouting. That was in ICCA Mauritius, is that just like you look for hidden gems as football players from Africa and take them to the Premier Leagues everywhere, there are brilliant practitioners from all parts of the globe that if you search enough and do some scouting, you'll be able to see talents that will surprise you.
Thank you very much, Professor. That's all from me. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Raul. Professor, I just have one question from Q&A, being mindful of the time. And I think it's something that we haven't discussed or addressed yet this morning, or today, sorry, because it is morning where I am. How do you combine your academic and professional careers? Is it easy to find time for an academic career at this stage of your professional career with a calendar as busy as yours is?
That's an excellent point. Let me say the following. I think you need to speak to my students to give you more a candid view than I speak for this myself. First of all, I think to me, it helps a lot. And especially, you can be a professor speaking in the abstract. And certainly there are fields that are good to that extent. But if you're teaching arbitration or teaching private international law, whatever, students, that's at least what I found. Students appreciate a lot teaching them the theory and the practice. And if you combine both and master both, they will be just sitting there in awe and following you and not feeling the time, and time flies. And that is, for me, is fulfilling. And let me tell you, my teaching to me is a bit of a cleansing. Why? Because when you appear before students, they don't maybe not know much about your career. They don't act out of interest of some sort. They either like you, respect you, appreciate you, or not. And when you see that you're contributing to building their minds or giving them knowledge and know-how, it is fulfilling and cleansing in a way. And to me, this is a very enriching experience. And I always tell them now, even sometimes in moments when they let me down by not being prepared or stuff, I tell them, look, I come here for you. And if you're not going to appreciate that, I'm busy and I may not have enough time, but I'm coming this to help you. And the moment I feel that I'm no longer able to help them, I will probably cease teaching. But my thought is that definitely going hand to hand with theory and practice does help a lot. With one important point, it is very important if you have an academic hat as the original hat, because I started off with my academic hat in my university. Public universities, you have to graduate and become one of the top students to be appointed as an academic. So I'm not really an adjunct, I have an academic hat. And the point is, you have, when you practice, to rise above the pure academic perspective and provide hands-on practical experience. And I'm saying that because, again, one of the unconscionable biases is that when you appear in cases, the immediate perception, oh, another academic, he's going to tell us about the law, but he's not going to help with the facts or the case. And I think academics need to do a lot of effort to show that they are able to put this theoretical, abstract understanding and mastering of the law into effect. And this helps a lot. That said, there are brilliant practitioners who I think can pass across as brilliant academics, but they don't have an academic hat as well. But it does help a lot, at least from my perspective. An additional point people do not say, I learn from my students as much as they learn from me. Why am I saying this? And I tell them that. You step into a room, you tell them about a topic, you discuss with them a topic they have no knowledge of, or at least minimal knowledge. Any of them, they have clear minds. They are not subject to the restraints of principles, concepts that we use in everyday life in our practice. And so any one of them can naively come up with an idea, a concept, an argument that no one has thought of, because he's not, let's say, clouded or plagued by the wealth of information that exists elsewhere. So you learn from that, and then you, of course, you commend them, saying that's an excellent idea, it's not a naive suggestion, and why not explore it in practice? So again, it's a two-way process, and I learn from my students.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think that question was answered very well. And I just want to ask just one more question before we end, and I think it connects with it very well. We had one of the participants ask about postgraduate education in relation to international arbitration. So as we just spoke about how you manage your academic career with your professional career, do you think that there are any specific postgraduate programs, master's or PhD, that a young practitioner should undertake for either professional or academic careers?
Let me be candid, and in clear messages, I say the following. In arbitration, or today's world, highly competitive amongst the younger generation, a lot of people with interest in international arbitration. And by the way, interest alone does not carry you forward in arbitration. Passion alone does not carry you forward. They are indispensable prerequisites. But in addition to that, you have to have what it takes in terms of the ability to work really under pressure, to be flexible with the working hours, the demands of international arbitration, the skills that we talked about generally. But that said, it does help when you have a master's degree of sorts, as looking good on the CV, as for interviews and stuff. But it is not when you really work hardcore in arbitration. There are excellent practitioners who do not have a master's or PhD degree at all. It is not that you will not make it without them. No, you would. The point is, it boosts your competitiveness amongst your peers. It does. Now, in terms of PhD, let me say the following, and maybe people will be surprised. I did a PhD because I have an academic hat. You have to have it. And for those in the developed world would know that you need a PhD if you become an academic. Now, in our countries, people tend to think when you have the PhD as well, it gives you certain moral weight or reputation. And that in certain cultures, in certain jurisdictions, is socially correct. I must say that. However, in these cultures and jurisdictions, there are many people now with PhDs. So the value of, or the impact of this is diluted by the vast number of holders of this title. Now, PhD, again, for academic helps, or mastering a specific topic. If you have an excellent PhD on a topic, it does give you a way of being introduced into the world, and that is true. And it works well, but it's not an indispensable requirement at all. And I think those hiring in firms, including my firm, and of course, international firms and magic circle firms who exist in everywhere, that's not defining whether you have a PhD or not. It's a question whether you can do the work, you bring value and add value. And by doing this, I think, as I mentioned, it does boost your competitiveness, but it's not a requirement to succeed in the field.
Thank you, Professor. I think that brings us to the end of our Q&A questions, the live questions at least, and the end of our webinar. I want to thank you on behalf of Young ICCA, myself, my other co-chairs, Matthew and Panos, also on behalf of Raul and the rest of the events coordinators for joining us today and participating in this webinar. I found it very insightful, and your advice is very invaluable, especially to a young practitioner like myself who's based in an emerging jurisdiction. So there's a lot of information to take in, and you were very personable, and we appreciate that you had some candor in your responses. So thank you again for joining us. And we
Thank
really
you very much, Dominique. It's a great pleasure. Thank you, Rahul. Thanks, everyone. And as I mentioned, I'm happy to address any questions online or offline. And those I have colleagues, younger colleagues from different jurisdictions, be it even in Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa. Otherwise, I don't want to forget. So I'm happy and open and delighted to assist whenever I'm able to. Thank you very much for hosting me today. And I hope it was not a burden for those attending or joining. And as I mentioned, happy to assist anytime.
Thank you so much, Professor. To the participants, we do have more webinars coming up. You can check the Young ICCA events page on our website or keep up on LinkedIn. We have some events planned for November and a bit in December that we think are going to be very interesting. The information will be released on that soon, and the recording and report for this webinar will be available shortly. So thank you again for participating, and again to Professor, we thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure.